My name is Barry Fitzgerald, for those of you that don't know. Many of you don't. What I do, I'm an author living over the west coast of Ireland. Presently working on a series of books called Legend Seekers. But I also wanted to talk to you about some of the technology which has come into the field, and in particular through photography. Now, the whole field itself has changed considerably. I see this camera here down in front of us, cameras up here which have changed considering the huge box cameras that used to be available 100 years ago or more, with a flash that could set people on fire. Technology has changed considerably. They reckon that technology changes leaps every 10 years, and then it leaped again to every 5 years. And I think now we're starting to look at a jump in technology every 3 years. But today I'm going to speak to you about the full spectrum technology. Full spectrum is a term denoted to a theory which I worked on some time ago. These cameras are what would be classed as full spectrum, the true essence of full spectrum. Unfortunately, working on a television show, which I did over in the US for almost half a decade, we weren't allowed to call the cameras Sony cameras. I want to use my Sony camera. We had to come up with an idea which was not advertising. So I had to think and scramble my brain and said, well, let's look at full spectrum camera. And hence the term full spectrum stuck. And if you Google full spectrum, you'll find the cameras and the theories behind it. Now, photography itself, the word is derived from the Greek words for light and writing, and was introduced by Sir John Herschel in 1839. I would imagine, looking at Sir John, if he actually seen the way he looked before the photograph was taken, he may have reconsidered his ideas of photography. Now, W. Campbell lived in New Jersey, and while he was taking a test photograph of an empty chair with no one else in the studio, at the time the developed plate showed an image of a small boy in 1860. Now, this was the very first spirit photo, but it soon took off, and up until the end of World War I, it was going well, even with all the frauds. Now, trickery was introduced in the early days of the photographic process, which coincided with the heyday of the spiritualist movement. A Boston engraver named William Mulner started shooting photographs that included faint images that were alleged to be his customers' deceased loved ones. The business was booming until someone noticed that the spirit faces resembled a number of living residents of Boston. Now, the spirits in the photographs were soon recognized as double exposures and overprinted images, and Mulner was arrested and charged with fraud. Now, the technology evolves every 3 years, as I've said, and the photography has not been left behind in the process. So, as you heard me say before, we had the huge box cameras with the huge open powder flash guns and things like that, to what we have today. We have actual pinhole cameras. We have cameras now that can rest on the bed or the back of a cockroach. In fact, I believe now we've got the technology where we can control the cockroach to do some little camera tests and record things that really shouldn't be recorded into our own privacy. But there we go. Now, back in 1999, a series of photos was taken in Guildhall, an English estate which stood since 1670 until, sadly, in 1969 when it burned in a fire. Now, here, during the experiments on location, we discovered a phenomenon which was showing up in the UV spectrum. Now, unlike the IR, where we formerly were led to believe, according to TV shows and things, Images were being lit by the UV from the flash, which were caught approaching the team. Now on the bridge we had set up 3 cameras, and I'm not going to go into detail on what we were doing, but briefly, the 3 cameras were set up in staged posts. The first camera dropped immediately, the power left, it was not functioning any further. The second camera, again, we got about 3 shots off before it failed, and it was the third camera caught the top image. Now this site in itself has been known for a long time for having some unusual, strangely ghostly phenomenon. And we took over a case which was brought to us by the late Sheila Sinclair. And Sheila had told me that don't be spending too much time on the site or you'll become sick. I thought, oh yeah, good one, Sheila. And she was right. There was something more about the land that we weren't being told about. And certainly in the old records, Gilhall is being listed back in his head as being a place on an unhealthy seat. And what they meant by that, we're not quite sure. But the camera technology developed from this particular image that was caught approaching our camera before it too died. Now Gilhall in itself was also known for the haunting of a coach and carriage, which was known and saw or seen in several places crossing the landscape. Now one particular evening I was there and I was able to record, I'll just bring this up, this coming across the bridge, and you can make up your own mind on what you think you hear. Just give me a second, I've got to plug in the audio. Can we get the audio guy to put the plug in again? Just give us a few seconds, folks. We'll call this up. I'll come back to the audio in a few moments. But some of the clues for the UV that led us in that particular investigative direction were some of the sensitives' claims of seeing spirits. Are these more a reflection of a broader field of sight or an ability to see more into one side of the spectrum than the other? Our own children. Some children up to the age of 7 to 13 years can see spirits, but as they get older, like their adult counterparts, a filter over the eye thickens and they can no longer see into the UV spectrum, or the IR spectrum for that matter. The majority of spirits that we found had a hatred for the UV spectrum. Now over the history of my research, I've found a huge majority of spirit will retract from UV light, and this in itself, when a UV light is applied to a negative haunting, will create a safe room, a room where the spirit will not manifest within. It seems to interfere on some levels with the manifestation, on levels I can only speculate on. But we also find out as well that the spirits on the positive end of things, on the other end of the scale, also had an apparent hate for infrared technology, the technology that we use to see in the dark to aid our cameras and everything else. So there was something there that we needed to address within the cameras. We needed cameras that could see into these low light conditions like a child's eye, but also be more responsive to those outer fringes of the electromagnetic spectrum that as a child we were seeing, whereas adults we could no longer see. And hence these cameras were born. Now this image, the next image that I'll be bringing up, is of a photograph that was brought to me by a particular person. 1,100 nanometers to 300 nanometers. Now for us, everything that we see, everything how you see the lights fall onto me, how you see each other, will fall between the violets and the reds. Everything, and the majority of us in this room, will perceive the world through this scale. Okay? Everything and how we perceive this world to be is here. Now, for someone to come around and tell me, if I don't see it, it's not real. Forgive my English, but that's bullshit. This is part of an electromagnetic scale which will extend another 93 million miles in each direction. If I was to pluck a hair out of my head, and I can't do that too often these days, that will represent this part of the scale. What we perceive the world is in that hair, which will extend another 93 million miles. What we see is an embarrassingly small amount of what this world is. So the cameras themselves were devised, again, as an adult, our spectral response narrows. So from a child's perspective, they're that little bit wider. The camera mimics the child's eye, where we see a little bit more into the UV spectrum and a little bit more into the infrared spectrum, but do not supply the light which will break down the bonds of manifestation. The very fact that these kids at night are seeing these things coming forward, the majority of them are coming from the darkness. They're coming into this here and now, but in situations and settings that does not break down the bonds of manifestation. The cameras do not break down the bonds of manifestation and work in low light settings. They mimic the child's eye. And therefore, you can start to see what goes on in those ranges. Now, a selection of alterations can be made depending... My God, the audio went way up there. A selection of the alterations can be made depending on your requirements, but most of all, CCD is capable of accepting, the CCD must be capable of accepting the broader spectrum. The hot mirror has to be removed, and sometimes it has to be replaced with an alternative. A ground crystal substitute will work perfectly for that as well, because the ground crystal will allow a greater amount of ultraviolet through. With these cameras, we have tried to mimic the child's eye, but it is capable of pushing the camera a little further by replacing the lens itself with a ground crystal substitute, which will allow more ultraviolet to pass through onto the CCD. Now, even today, we still are having problems getting cameras converted to full spectrum. Getting a reputable company to make the switch and stand over the work is another problem. The camera manufacturers are reluctant to list their cameras' capabilities, so we really had to be careful about identifying the cameras that would allow us to make these changes. And at Haunted Solutions, the guys are just sitting over here. Raise your hands, please. There we go. Those are the people who work with me in producing these cameras to the paranormal field. Now, not only that, but we're also working on producing cameras and continually stepping forward to produce a camera which is in the Starlight technology, which is now being pushed forward to the ufology field with a greater area of view and a greater spectral response in a low light condition is fantastic for the ufology field. So that's something we're working on producing as well. And also we really are in talks about trying to find this high-speed camera with a more a full spectrum approach. Because you see, within the paranormal field, we tend to find a lot of things will happen at the corner of the eye. You know, and you suddenly turn around and look and it's gone. Well, as people, we see around 35 frames a second maximum. That's about what we can see. That's what we process, right? 35 frames a second. Now, if we step back, and I spoke to some people about this already today, if we step back and de-evolve ourselves, maybe, into a tortoise sees about 15 frames a second. So if a child runs by the front of a tortoise, he feels the breeze but can't see it. He goes, what the hell was that? It just can't see and process the information fast enough. Now, the way we have evolved is that we will process frames per second faster by the corner of our eye, rather than direct vision. So that's something to consider as well, and that's something we're trying to work out with the cameras, is get a higher spectral response with a high-speed camera to see what else is happening in ranges above what we can normally process and slow it way down. So those are the interesting things that we're really trying to evolve into, and the reasons why we are making steps to continually step forward and reaching out to other fields of research as well in this, because I believe together we can all do this. Now, camera alterations can be made in the USA, but I think buying a camera that's already converted can be a little tricky due to government red tape. Now, these cameras that I'm talking about are the still cameras, not the video cameras. Still full spectrum technology is very, very difficult within certain countries, and I often wondered why. Why is it illegal to have a camera with more spectral sensitivity? What's going on? And one day I happened to, and I shouldn't really be sharing this, but I'll tell you anyway. One day I happened to find out by accident, because I was photographing buildings, one of which happened to be a bank. And banks, of course we know, have a lot of glass in it that reflects back. They've got a filter on the glass. The full spectrum camera was able to shoot right through the filter and allow me to see what was on the other side. And I thought, ooh, now I know why these things are illegal. And not only that, but cars. Cars have a filter. You know, you'll see them driving around with a black glass on them. The full spectrum camera was shooting directly through the glass, and I could see the people sitting on the other side. And so then, you know, as I said, I began to understand why these things were a little sensitive in some countries. Thankfully not ours. But there is another company, if you have a still camera that can make the conversions for you, called lifepixel.com. They're expensive, but very reliable. And the still cameras, which are sensitive, some of which can be a Canon, some are Fuji. There are some Sony which can be converted, but they're rare in the field. But these SLR type cameras are extremely expensive initially to purchase, and then paying the extra $500, $600 for conversion and shipping, of course, works out to be very, very expensive. Now, excuse me, one of the images I wanted to show you of full spectrum technology was captured by myself in Australia, Tasmania to be exact. And this used to be an old colony, prison colony. The church had burned down, and it was around 11, 12 o'clock at night. And I liked the way that the church was lit up with the orange light, and I took the shot. Now, as you can see in the low light conditions, the shot came up wonderfully well. What also happened to appear was the guy walking either from the church on the right-hand side or walking to the church. We could never tell because he wasn't there. And that to us was a big thing. We're going, what the hell? How did that happen? Now, this was set on a 35-second exposure. I sent my comrade in arms, Mr. Joe Chin, up to the church and made him pace it out as what we saw our character doing in shot. Joe was able to make it from one side of the shot to the other and left a motion blur all the way across. I still to this day don't know how that figure got in, and I've lost my sound again. I don't know how that figure got in to that shot in 35 seconds in solid frame. I can't understand it. That's it there. Okay? In case you're wondering. This was another figure that we were headhunting. Darren, do you know this site? It's in Armagh?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
This is a nasty SOB. And he can cause quite a lot of trouble. But this is one of the guys that was caught using the early examples of the full spectrum technology. And he gave us one hell of a runaround. But we were eventually able to track him and got the shot. This was another example over in Fresno. Now this gets a little complicated because the guy in Fresno, I believe has been shut down by the city. But I think from what I heard, is that the place is being torn down, which is unfortunate, because there was often a lot of activity reported within the site. And now this lady over in Wales, of course, was another one, and this was some of the early cameras and some of the differences between the CCDs that we were seeing. And what you can see in the mirror is the reflection of something that had been attacking this particular lady in question. And that was exceptionally violent toward her. And so you may be able to see that figure in the glass to the right, the far right of the picture frame, or the mirror, sorry. And I don't know, no, it's going to be too dark again, so forget that one. But this was captured in Jamaica whenever I was there. I didn't want to spend too much time in Jamaica because I nearly lost my head, literally, with a machete. So I like to get in there and get back out again, and hopefully I'll never see Jamaica again. Now what I wanted to do is try this audio again for you folks. Hopefully this will work. That was recorded coming across the bridge at that particular site. Now we were working with different ideas, schools of thought on that, and it really was a lucky shot. It was a shot in the dark, and it paid off. Now something else I wanted to show you was some more video of the early examples of the full spectrum technology, because I began to test all around the world, and one of the key tests for me was in New Orleans, as they say in the US. And I was on the second floor of this establishment, this private dwelling. Behind me was open air. And what you should pay attention to is the pane of glass on the left-hand side of the video, and watch for the shadow movement within the glass. And hopefully it's not too dark. run that one more time.
Was there 2 in that July?
There was more than 2, yeah.
Was there a 16
So that was an example of some of the early tests that we were going through with the full spectrum technology, and I hope that breaks it down for you to understand why we need to push to this area of full spectrum technology, and understand why we should reduce our light within the areas of investigating. Certainly within the paranormal field, we tend to find that spirit manifestation is much easier in a low light red setting, pure red. And this has been exceptionally effective for us, and it's something that we promote. Getting away from the excessive use of infrared and ultraviolet. Now this technology, of course, is going with us out into mainland Europe, where I'll be running more tests this year with Compass Paranormal, and we're heading off to Colditz Castle in Germany, the old prisoner of war camp. Unfortunately, that investigation, folks, is sold out. Transylvania, where we're heading up to Dracula's Castle, is also sold out, I'm afraid, but we still have places available for Weisselberg, which, for people who are familiar with their World War II history, is one of the seats of the SS Center, Central Commands. It's a huge castle, and underneath they had this area where they performed their ceremonies and everything else, and there was bizarre ceremonies that were conducted there. We will have that castle for 2 days. We'll be staying in the castle, investigating it, and we'll be running all the full spectrum technologies within it. And those trips are still available. If you contact the guys at Compass Paranormal, raise your hands. Thank you. Also, what we have is still places left for Wolfschanze, which is translates into English as in the Wolf's Lair. This is a place over in Poland, which is happening in June, I believe. We're heading out there. It's a huge command base for Adolf Hitler, and we have access to the entire site, all the bunkers, underground systems, the whole lot. We'll be staying on site for our time investigating the base. We'll be staying in a former SS bunker, which is converted into a hotel, and there's a bar underneath for people who can't handle it, so it's all grand. I'll have my artillery down there. And so those places are still available. And I have to tell you, having visited Wolfschanze several times, I tend to throw a camera over my back and I will head into wherever I'm going and take my photographs. I love nighttime photography. Wolfschanze was one of those places I got in 400 yards and turned it high tail and says, to hell with this. It's a place you will feel history, and it's a place that is very unnerving at night, and it's a place that should not be underestimated. Of all the places around the world that I've been, that was the one place that I have come closest to Adolf Hitler. So that is something that you shouldn't underestimate, and these are the guys over here that you should speak to about that. Now, moving back to the room itself, and questions about the full spectrum technologies. Does anyone have any specific questions or anything else on the nature of paranormal before we break down and allow the next speaker in?
How long have you been working on the cameras from?
Oh, the full spectrum technology itself was in development, must be over 10 years now, from its early inception back. Understanding what was going on the bridge and the photographs that were taken and everything else. From 10 years ago. But it was technology for us, accessible technology to the public, that was holding us back. So the release of that technology, which is now speeding up faster and faster is allowing us to keep up with the development within the full spectrum technology.